They laughed at my granddaughter because she wore the same faded dress every day. They called her poor girl, pointed, whispered, even filmed her on their phones. But when the principal told her to remove her jacket, the room went dead silent. What they saw underneath made even the teachers cry. Before I tell you what happened that day, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from: morning in Lagos, night in London, or afternoon in New York, because what I'm about to say still breaks my heart. My name is Ruth. I'm 68, and for the past 14 years, I've been raising my granddaughter, Emily, alone. Her parents never made it out of the fire that night. All I ever wanted was to protect her from pain. But pain has a way of finding those who already have scars. You know, people think they understand poverty when they see a child wearing the same clothes. They think they're so smart, so observant. But they never stop to ask why. They never pause their cruel laughter long enough to wonder what story lies beneath that faded fabric. And God help me, I let them hurt my baby for months before I truly understood what was happening. That dress Emily wore every single day? It wasn't because we couldn't afford others. Lord knows I worked my fingers to the bone cleaning offices until midnight, scrubbing floors until my knees screamed, just to make sure she had choices. Her closet had other clothes hanging there, still with tags on some of them. But every morning, she'd reach for that same pale blue dress, now faded to almost gray, with tiny flowers that had been washed so many times they looked like ghosts of themselves. It belonged to her mother, her only physical reminder of the woman who used to sing her to sleep, who used to braid her hair, who used to kiss her scraped knees and promise everything would be okay. That dress was the last thing my daughter ever made with her own hands, sitting at our old sewing machine in the weeks before Emily was born, humming lullabies and dreaming of the life they'd build together. It makes me feel like Mama's still hugging me, Emily would whisper when I'd gently suggest maybe wearing something else. And how could I argue with that? How could I take away the only comfort she had left of her mother? So instead, I learned to mend that dress like it was made of gold. I'd sit under our dim kitchen light, threading needle after needle, stitching love into every seam, reinforcing every weak spot, because that dress had to last. It had to survive whatever this cruel world threw at my granddaughter. The smell of our cheap soap clung to it, mixed with the faint scent of the lavender fabric softener I'd splurge on sometimes, just to make her feel special. The threads were fraying at the collar, where she'd nervously pick at them when she was anxious. The hem had been let down twice as she grew, leaving ghost lines that told the story of a child reaching toward a future her mother would never see. At home, wrapped in that dress, Emily felt safe. She'd twirl in our tiny living room, the skirt spinning around her like she was dancing with her mother's memory. But the moment she stepped through those school doors, the warmth drained from her face. The armor that dress provided at home became a target painted on her back the second she entered that building filled with children who had everything and understood nothing. When she got accepted into Lincoln Academy, I thought the pain would finally stop. I cleaned tables for 3 extra months to afford the uniform and books, my arthritic hands scrubbing sticky surfaces until they bled, because I believed this school was going to be different. I told myself this school was different: smaller classes, caring teachers, kinder children. The brochures promised a nurturing environment where every child could flourish. The principal himself had called to congratulate Emily on her acceptance, speaking about values and community and how they treasured diversity. I couldn't have been more wrong. The bullying started small, the way poison always does. Whispers that slithered through hallways like snakes. She wears the same thing every day. Maybe she's homeless. Did you see how she mends the tears? They said it just loud enough for Emily to hear, just quiet enough to deny if a teacher walked by. In the cafeteria, children would suddenly find excuses to sit elsewhere when she approached with her tray. Tables that had empty seats would mysteriously become full when she looked their way. She'd end up sitting alone, picking at her lunch while conversations swirled around her like she was invisible. Sometimes I'd pack her favorite cookies, thinking maybe sharing would help her make friends. But those cookies sat untouched because there was no one to share them with. Then came the phones. These children, barely teenagers, recording my granddaughter like she was some kind of spectacle. One girl, Sarah, with her perfect blonde hair and designer bag, would secretly film Emily walking down the hallway, adding mocking captions about fashion disasters and posting them online. They thought humiliation was entertainment. They thought cruelty was comedy. Emily would come home, carefully fold that same dress, hang it in her closet like it was a wedding gown, and whisper so quietly I almost missed it, "Maybe I should stop going, Grandma." Those words hit me harder than any diagnosis, any bill I couldn't pay, any sleepless night I'd endured. My granddaughter, who had survived flames that took her parents, was being broken by children who had never known real suffering. I watched her spirit crumble piece by piece. The girl who used to dance in our living room now moved like she was carrying the weight of the world. She stopped humming her mother's lullabies. She stopped asking me to tell stories about what her mama was like. She just existed, quietly, carefully, like she was afraid of taking up too much space in a world that had already decided she didn't belong. And I felt helpless. Completely, utterly helpless. Here I was, a grown woman who had survived losing her daughter, who had rebuilt her life around raising this child, and I couldn't protect her from the casual cruelty of her peers. I'd lie awake at night, my heart burning with a rage I couldn't express, planning conversations with teachers that never seemed to matter, rehearsing speeches about kindness that fell on deaf ears. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. The air was crisp, and Emily had been particularly quiet during breakfast, stirring her oatmeal without eating, staring out our kitchen window like she was looking for escape routes. I should have kept her home. God forgive me, I should have listened to the voice in my head that said something was wrong. It was during morning assembly. The entire school was gathered in that grand hall with its vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows that made everything look holy, even when it wasn't. Emily sat in the back row, her worn jacket zipped up tight despite the warm air, arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself together. The principal was droning on about school values, respect, integrity, community, words that sounded beautiful but meant nothing when children were being torn apart in the hallways. And then I heard later what happened next, because Emily came home and told me everything through her tears, every detail burned into her memory like a brand. A teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had noticed Emily's jacket and decided it looked too worn, too casual for their standards. She whispered to the principal, Mr. Morrison, something about dress code violations and maintaining appearances. And this man, this educator who was supposed to protect children, decided that the middle of assembly was the perfect time to make an example. Emily Rodriguez, his voice boomed through the microphone, echoing off those holy walls. Please stand up. 500 pairs of eyes turned to look at my granddaughter. 500 children, all perfectly dressed in their crisp uniforms, all staring at the girl in the faded dress and worn jacket. Emily's face went white as paper. Her hands trembled as she slowly rose from her seat. Emily, please remove your jacket. We follow proper uniform policy here at Lincoln Academy. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd like a disease. These children sensed blood in the water, and they were circling for the kill. I can only imagine how Emily felt in that moment, exposed, humiliated, trapped between disobedience and devastation. Please, sir. I can't, she whispered, but the microphone caught it, broadcast her desperation to every corner of that hall. Remove the jacket, now, Mr. Morrison commanded, his voice harder now, annoyed that she wasn't immediately complying with his public power play. Emily looked around desperately, searching for a kind face, a sympathetic teacher, anyone who might intervene. But there was no one. Just hundreds of children waiting for the show, phones already out, ready to capture whatever humiliation was about to unfold. She trembled like a leaf in a hurricane as her shaking fingers found the zipper. The sound of it opening seemed to echo forever in that silence. And when she finally, slowly, pulled off that protective jacket and let it fall to the floor, you could hear a pin drop. The collective gasp that went up from that assembly still haunts my dreams. Because there, on my granddaughter's arms, were the scars. Twisted, permanent reminders of the night she almost died. Raised tissue that told the story of flames and smoke and a little girl fighting for her life while her parents took their last breaths. Scars that she had hidden for months, wrapped in long sleeves and jackets, because she knew exactly what would happen if people saw them. Some children covered their mouths in shock. Others began to cry. The teachers froze like statues, finally understanding the magnitude of their failure. Sarah, the girl with the perfect hair who had tormented Emily for months, dropped her phone, her face crumpling with the weight of her cruelty. The laughter that had filled that hall for months, whenever Emily walked by, that casual, careless laughter that had been slowly killing my granddaughter, collapsed into tears and shame. Children who had pointed and whispered suddenly couldn't look at her. The same arms they had mocked for always being covered, the same girl they had called names and filmed and isolated, was standing before them bearing the evidence of a tragedy that would have broken most adults. Mr. Morrison went pale as recognition dawned on his face. He remembered now the fire that had made headlines 14 years ago, the little girl who had been pulled from the flames, the parents who didn't make it out. He had probably read about it in the paper, maybe even donated to the fund that helped pay for Emily's medical bills. But he had never connected that tragedy to the quiet girl in the faded dress who sat in his school every day. And in that moment of horrible clarity, as my granddaughter stood there with her scars exposed to the world, I think everyone in that room finally understood what they had been doing. They had been mocking a survivor. They had been laughing at strength. They had been cruel to a child who had already endured more pain than any of them could imagine. Let me tell you about that night, the night that marked my granddaughter forever and took my daughter from me. It was the sound of glass shattering that woke me at 2:47 in the morning. I lived just 3 blocks away then, close enough to hear the windows exploding from the heat, close enough to smell the smoke that would haunt my dreams for years to come. By the time I got there, the house was already gone. The flames were so high they seemed to touch the stars, and the heat was so intense that the firefighters couldn't get close enough fast enough. My daughter, my beautiful Sarah, and her husband Michael were trapped on the 2nd floor. I watched that house burn with my heart and soul inside it, screaming until my voice gave out, fighting against the arms that held me back from running into those flames myself. But Emily, my little Emily, survived. A firefighter named Captain Rodriguez, no relation despite the name, refused to give up. When everyone else said it was too late, when the chief was calling them back, he wrapped himself in every piece of protective gear they had and went in one more time. He found her in her parents' bedroom, where they had apparently tried to shield her with their own bodies. He carried her out through a collapsing hallway, his own gear smoking, both of them barely breathing. Those scars on her arms? They were the price she paid to keep breathing. The flames had caught her pajama sleeves as that hero firefighter carried her to safety. 3rd-degree burns that required skin grafts, months of physical therapy, years of healing both inside and out. Every inch of raised tissue on her arms was a testament to her will to live, to her parents' final act of love, to a stranger's courage in the face of impossible odds. That old dress she wore every day? It was the last thing her mother ever sewed. Sarah had made it in the weeks before the fire, humming while she worked, dreaming of all the places they'd go together, all the memories they'd make. She never got to see Emily wear it. Never got to see how beautiful her daughter looked twirling in that handmade creation. But somehow, that dress survived when everything else turned to ash, and it became the only way Emily could still feel her mother's love wrapped around her. After the revelation in that assembly hall, Mr. Morrison stepped forward, his voice trembling with emotion and shame. "Emily," he said, and for the first time since she'd been at that school, an adult spoke her name with respect. "I knew your mother. I was her teacher too, back when she was your age." The recognition hit him like a physical blow. He had taught my Sarah, had watched her graduate, had probably even congratulated her when Emily was born. And now here was her daughter, the little girl who had survived the fire that took Sarah away, being humiliated in his school while he stood by and watched. "Today, I failed as an educator," he announced to that silent assembly. "But I will not fail again." He canceled the rest of the program right there, sent the children back to their classrooms with words that would ring in their ears for years to come. "You mocked strength disguised as poverty. You laughed at survival. And I allowed it to happen under my watch." The change wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight. But later that day, something happened that gave me the first real hope I'd felt in months. Sarah, the girl with the perfect hair who had tormented Emily, approached her at her locker. "I didn't know," she said, her own voice breaking. "I swear to God, I didn't know." Emily looked at her for a long moment, this girl who had made her life miserable, who had filmed her and mocked her and made her feel invisible. And then, with a wisdom far beyond her years, my granddaughter said something that still brings tears to my eyes. "You didn't need to know to be kind." Sarah began to cry then. Real tears, not the crocodile tears of someone caught in wrongdoing, but the deep, soul-shaking sobs of genuine remorse. "If I swear to you that I'll never laugh at anyone again, not for what they wear, not for what they hide, will you forgive me?" Emily looked at this broken girl, this child who had learned cruelty from a world that values appearance over character, and she nodded. Not because Sarah deserved forgiveness, but because Emily understood that holding on to anger would only add more scars to the ones she already carried. The transformation that followed was like watching a miracle unfold in slow motion. The school organized an awareness event about kindness and resilience, and Emily's story became the heart of it. When the day came, I watched from the audience as my granddaughter walked onto that stage wearing the same faded dress that had been mocked for months, but this time, she wore it with pride. No jacket, sleeves rolled up, her scars visible to the world. The standing ovation that erupted from that auditorium shook the building. Children who had whispered about her were now cheering for her. Teachers who had looked the other way were wiping tears from their eyes. Even the bullies, especially the bullies, were on their feet, clapping and crying and finally understanding what courage really looked like. Mr. Morrison presented her with the newly created Student of Honor for Resilience award, and as he placed that medal around her neck, he whispered an apology that I could see heal something broken inside my granddaughter's heart. That day, the same dress they had mocked became a symbol of courage, of survival, of the strength it takes to keep going when the world tries to break you. I watched from the crowd, tears streaming down my face, not tears of pain this time, but tears of pride so overwhelming I thought my heart might burst. This was the same little girl I had raised from ashes, the same child who had nightmares about flames and missing her parents, the same granddaughter who had whispered about not wanting to go to school anymore. But now she was standing tall, sharing her story, turning her pain into purpose and her scars into strength. I used to hate that old dress. I hated what it represented: loss, poverty, the visible reminder that we weren't like other families. I hated having to mend it over and over, hated watching Emily choose it every morning when she had other options. But now I wash it with tears of gratitude, understanding finally that it was never about the dress at all. That dress reminded the world that what we wear doesn't define us, what we survive does. It became a testament to my daughter's love, to Emily's strength, to the bonds that death cannot break and flames cannot consume. Every faded flower on that fabric tells a story of resilience. Every carefully mended seam speaks of love that endures beyond the grave. So if you've ever been laughed at for what you have, or what you don't have. Remember, Emily. Remember that the children pointing and whispering don't know your story. They don't know what battles you've fought, what losses you've endured, what strength it takes for you to walk through those doors every single day. Remember that their laughter says everything about them and nothing about you. Her scars made her story, not her shame. And your struggles, whatever they are, wherever they come from, they're writing your story too. Don't let anyone convince you that surviving isn't beautiful. Don't let anyone make you believe that bearing the marks of your battles makes you less than whole. Tell me your country and time in the comments, because no matter where you are, whether it's morning in Lagos, night in London, or afternoon in New York, someone out there needs to hear this today. Someone is wearing their own version of that faded dress, carrying their own invisible scars, wondering if they're strong enough to keep going. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that kindness costs nothing, but heals everything. Because in a world that profits from cruelty, choosing compassion is the most radical act of all. And because every Emily deserves to know that their scars are not their shame, they're proof that they're still here, still fighting, still beautiful despite everything that tried to break them.